Wisdom, the final frontier to true knowledge. Welcome to Wisdom Trek, where our mission is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. Hello, my friend. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, your captain on our journey to increase wisdom and create a living legacy. Thank you for joining us today as we explore wisdom on our second millennium of podcast. Today is 1501 of our trek, and it is Worldview Wednesday. Creating a biblical worldview is essential in order to have a proper perspective on today's current events. To establish a biblical worldview, you must have a proper understanding of God and His Word. This week on our Worldview Wednesday episode, we will continue our study based on a course I recently completed, taught by Dr. Michael S. Heiser. Our study is titled, Sons and Daughters of God, the Believer's Identity, Calling, and Destiny. Throughout this multi-week course, we will demonstrate that in the Old Testament, sons of God and holy ones refer to supernatural beings whose Father is God and who work with God to carry out His will, and that this divine family was present before humanity. By fully engaging the biblical texts such as Psalm 82, Psalm 89, and Deuteronomy chapter 32 verses 8 and 9, our study will show that His divine family functions as a template for God's human family. God desires of human, as His imagers, to participate in His counsel. This study addresses issues such as polytheism, the nature of little g gods, and Yahweh's uniqueness. This study will apply insights to the New Testament text, which shows how the metaphor of being in God's family informs our sense of identity and mission as believers. So today we'll continue with the Family of Imagers, segment number 28, Believers as Family Participants, Part 1. As we introduce this, there are several statements about Jesus in the New Testament. There are also several references to us as His siblings because of the Incarnation. These references build on the family language of the Old Testament sons of God, and the divine family specifically as it relates to representing God, that is to say, imaging God. And we see that Christ is in the image of God, and this intentionally links to Genesis. For instance, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, we read that Satan, who is the god of this world, has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. They are unable to see the glorious light of the good news. They don't understand this message about the glory of Christ, who is in the exact likeness of God, or in the image of God. Now we know from the Old Testament that we are spoken of in the same language. If you were a person reading this or hearing this from Paul or the mouth of some other apostle, you would immediately think back to the concept, that is the scene in Genesis 1, where humanity is created in God's image, or as we've suggested, as God's imager. Here you have Christ called the image of God, or in the likeness of God. He is, think about it, the ultimate human. He becomes man. He is incarnate as a human being, and He is here to do many things, but one of them is to show us what God is like, to be God in the Father's stead, as it were. Of course, Jesus alludes to this several times in His own ministry, but this language again is intentional. As we fix our minds on the fact that Jesus is the ultimate imager, the ultimate example of this, the ultimate template, when the language shifts to believers, that's going to make sense. It's going to take our minds back to Genesis and help us to process these things because they have a long history that goes all the way back to the beginning. And we see that our purpose is to be conforming to Christ. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, it says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. Now, that has a visible element because, as John says in 1 John, the Word, who was God, became flesh. So we have a visible representation, but the idea of just a general representation, being God, in time and place, is also part of the package. Romans chapter 8, verse 29, believers know, for God knew His people in advance. He chose them to become like His Son, so that His Son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Here we have two aspects. We have the Son of God, the ultimate imager, and we are to be conformed to Him. What does that mean? It means that we are to represent God the way Jesus represented God. The way he played the role of imager is how we are to play the role of imager. We were created to be his imager. We were made to represent God, which means to work with him to carry out his will in this place that he has put us, which is earth, the terrestrial realm. Jesus is the example that's going to be the template, not just for a few individuals, but for many. That is, anyone who believes. He is the example. He brought us here to bring us into the family through redemption. That makes us siblings with him, and he is to be our example on how we carry out the original mandate of Eden to be God's representation. And imaging is linked to sanctification. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, we read this, "For the Lord is the Spirit, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." So all of us who've had that veil removed can see and reflect on the glory of the Lord, and the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image. This links our sanctification, the whole process of becoming more like Christ, to the imaging idea. Ultimately, we can see how these things dovetail. We are more like Christ. That is the fulfillment of God's original plan, what he wanted from humanity back in Genesis chapter 1. And when you think through this, we are essentially divine beings. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 49, Paul says, "For we are now like the earthly man. We will someday be like the heavenly man." This refers to being divine beings because of our spirit, the immaterial part of us, which is not terrestrial. We are divine beings. We receive a body in this embodied world to represent God, but ultimately we will have a new body, and that body will be like the one of Christ that he had after the resurrection. And Paul spends a lot of time in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 talking about that. So this is our destiny, to be essentially made like him. Like 1 John chapter 3 verse 2 says, we will be like him, and that includes this glorified body, this glorified existence. That is part of our destiny. That was Eden's original goal, to take the embodied human beings God has made and somehow graft them into the divine family, unite them into a blended family. It is a long time in getting there, and of course, we are in this already, but not yet kind of situation now. Paul and these other writers are borrowing from, really dipping into, the language of the Old Testament, and that is seen in Colossians chapter 3 verses 9 and 10. Don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature, and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like him. This verse is just another reference with the idea of representing God, becoming progressively less unlike him and more like him through the process of sanctification. Ultimately, that will be completed when we are made divine as we can be. We are made like Jesus after his resurrection. It's not the idea that we're going to become little Yahwehs, but we will become as close to him as we can be. We're still a derivative. We're still cognizant. We're still lesser because of our original creation. As we become more like Christ, who is the God of Israel, Yahweh incarnate, we can bear the similarity just like a family relationship. Like natural offspring, we will bear the similarity to the ultimate extent at our glorification. That will finish our study for this week on Worldview Wednesday. Next week, we will cover part 2 of Believers as Family Participants. Tomorrow, we will enjoy a 3-minute humor nugget that will provide you with a bit of cheer, which will help you to lighten up and live a rich and satisfying life. So encourage your friends and family to join us and to come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, Creating a Legacy. If you'd like to listen to any of the past 1,500 treks or read the Wisdom Journals, they are all available at wisdom-trek.com. And I encourage you to subscribe to Wisdom Trek on your favorite podcast player so that each day's trek will be downloaded automatically. And thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, but most importantly, I am your friend as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal each day. And as we take this trek of life, together let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to keep moving forward enjoy your journey, and then create a great day every day. See you tomorrow.